Welcome to the Trust Us, We're Professionals podcast with your friends from SSC, CPAs, and advisors. This is a podcast where we use movies, TV, news, and pop culture stories to make complex financial matters easier for our listeners to understand. I'm your host, Chris Underwood, a financial advisor with SSC Wealth, and I'm once again joined by Chris Cohart, a senior manager at SSC, and Erica Dvorsky, our chief operating officer. What's up, Chris? What's up, Co?
Nice.
Co, chief operating officer.
Yeah.
Get it? Yeah.
Get it.
And I think a relevant addition to her title is like previous executive director to many not-for-profit organizations.
Yeah, I can't make that sound cool.
I
saying,
know, but
yeah,
it's relevant.
It is very relevant because in today's episode, a very important episode, we're going to talk about the economic impact of nonprofits. Now, unfortunately, nonprofits don't have a lot of references or moments in the sun, if you will, in pop culture. So we're going to go about explaining this in a slightly different way. It'll make sense, I promise. At least I hope. So, Erica and Chris, how do you see nonprofits being depicted in pop culture?
Poorly? Not at all. Inadequately. Yes, all of those. It's pretty light. They never get, like you said, they don't have their moment in the sun. They don't really have the star that shines bright. We all know it's there, but the movies don't generally have movies or television or pop culture in general. We don't really see a lot of positive, not necessarily not positive, but we don't see them as kind of being the key central component of a movie or of a television show, that it's all around how this not-for-profit or this character in this not-for-profit is operating.
Yeah. And, I think there are some interesting snapshots and examples. I mean, you've got, Sandra Bullock in 2 Weeks Notice. You've got, superhero movies frequently have a gala ball that people attend and then people die at.
Right.
There's
never the superheroes, but other people.
No, but there's charity benefits going on as sometimes a backdrop, but I think it kind of belies the story of the role that the charities in our communities play.
Yeah, I also think about it. Sometimes it's a punishment. There's the movie role models where Paul Rudd is sentenced to community service, and so he works for like a boys and girls club. So it's not a positive necessarily depiction of the charity. It's a great movie, I guess in a lot of people's minds, but it didn't necessarily highlight the impact per se of that not-for-profit for those kids. I always like there's also the not-for-profits of George was put on a board of directors for Susan's estate or foundation after she passed away from licking too many envelopes for their wedding.
From Seinfeld.
Yes.
Right.
But you got to save money on the glue.
We had to save money on the glue. But we never, to my knowledge, and I think Erica said remembers one not-for-profit movie.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody else in the room ever remembered what that one was. So Erica's seen it, but very rarely do we see a Renee Witherspoon as the executive director of a not-for-profit just trying to make ends meet and raise all the money on her budget and raise all the money to spend in her budget and trying to figure it out in a Frankenstein way where I'm going to ask this person for money and I'm going to sell this and I'm going to do all these things just to raise enough money to do the good service that they're doing.
Well, Renee Witherspoon sounds like a Frankenstein monster of Renee Zellweger and Reese Witherspoon.
Did I say Renee?
You said Renee.
Reese Witherspoon. Sorry, Reese.
It's okay. I think she'll forgive us. But the point we're making here...
When she listens.
When she listens, she's a big fan of the show, from what I hear.
She actually went to she grew up in the same town as my wife, the same age. I think my wife might know some people that went to school with her. So my wife might be quasi-famous because she might know Reese. She doesn't know Renee, but she probably knows a Reese.
I think the point we're making, though, is that nonprofits never get their moment in the sun, but they do have a serious economic impact, even though it's not depicted in pop culture or TV or movies. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think based on the Q1 2021 Bureau of Analysis, the arts and entertainment and recreation component of our U.S. economy was just behind construction. It's like construction is 10th, the arts is 11th, and transportation and warehouse is like 12th or 13th. So what you kind of think of generally for what's driving the economy, construction, warehousing, those are right in the same realms. And obviously there's bigger fish in the economic model than these, but it's still right there in the positive impact of what's putting money in people's pockets and driving this economy.
And when you think about the charities, really cross. They're in arts and entertainment. They're also in the social service sector. They're also in the healthcare sector. They're also in the education sector. There really is a big cross section when you do kind of a cross-cutting analysis within the Bureau of Economic Analysis.
Right. And so to try to pull this all back to what we like to do, which is in the pop culture realm. So we thought, how do we view the arts, entertainment, not-for-profit as it relates to the overall economic U.S. economy? And I kind of looked at it as, here's the movie characters or the actors. And number one on that list was durable goods and manufacturing. So like that's the George Clooney of the U.S. economy. Professional and scientific was number two. That's Sandra Bullock. These are people that are driving $20 million, $25 million per movie. Information is Brad Pitt. Julia Roberts is, I don't know why I picked this one. Nothing to speak of Julia Roberts, but administrative and waste management services.
Yeah, I think we could have done better than that, maybe. But continue. I see the point.
But she's fourth. So that fourth these are fourth in our overall economic based off of that study. So those kind of being the people that you think of movies, I know everybody knows these people. They all know that these things drive economy. So kind of in my view, the not-for-profits are like Jensen Ackles. I don't know if anybody knows who that is. I do. He very popular television show that lasted 13 seasons, Supernatural. So long career. Or maybe Isla Fisher.
Isla, I'm pretty sure.
Isla, okay. I didn't even know. But I do know she's been in a ton of movies, and she always gets mistaken for Amy Adams.
And she's married to Sacha Baron Cohen.
Right. Very successful, popular people, but you kind of are somewhat under the radar as to the impact that they have in maybe pop culture and in the movie industry.
Not household names.
Not household
It's not
names.
The Rock.
You don't think of that. That's not the first person you think of.
That's who waste management is.
Oh, yeah, that should have been good.
Rock.
I think The Rock is just GDP in general. I mean,
right. But there's still a serious economic impact that they have. There was an article on the National Council of Not-for-Profits that says that not-for-profits employ 12.3 million people annually, which is approximately $825 billion worth of payroll per year. And they spend about $2 trillion in our economy every year, just in the not-for-profit sector. So pretty serious numbers that they're throwing out there for what they're employing and how much they're spending.
And as a bit of a piece of that, 5% of the employment is based in kind of the charitable sector, or 5% of the GDP. Sorry, 5% of the GDP is in the charitable sector, but 10% of the employment is in the charitable sector. So that gives you a slight sense, briefly, and do some quick math. You can say, wow, they employ a lot more people at far lower rates, which isn't necessarily a positive thing.
I was about to say,
Well, yeah, this is not good news, but it also does give a sense of, the role that actually more people, more is accomplished, more is done with that smaller percentage of the GDP.
So what we're saying is that, just to kind of recap, is that nonprofits are represented in pop culture as the supporting movie character. Now, are we talking about the waitress with 2 lines, the bus driver, or is there an instance like Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire where he just kind of doesn't come out of nowhere? I mean, Cuba Gooding Jr. was in Boys in the Hood and he was successful, but never nominated for an Oscar, did that performance, eye-opening, shocked the world, won an Oscar, first and only time he's ever been nominated.
Yeah, I think I can think of one really, really recently. But it's probably not as well known as maybe one that Erica would think about. But recently, in December of 2020, Dave Portnoy with Barstool had decided that he wanted to start raising money for small and local businesses. So in a span of 5 months, he raised, I believe it was around $40 million. And its point was to help local restaurants stay open with a 30-day kind of cushion. And so he's helped 443 local restaurants. And I think he did expand beyond restaurants, but that was the main focus. 443 restaurants since December of 2020 to keep their doors open.
Good for him, especially during everything that's been going on.
Right. And there was lots of money that was available to restaurants, but it was also, there was still a lot that were struggling to find the means to keep their doors open. So that's a small, not like it's $440 million in a span of a few months is a lot of money. And it obviously had a big impact, but I know there's some bigger. That's probably not Cuba Gooding Jr.
Yeah. Show me the money, Erica. Show me the money.
So I think the example that everyone thinks of is in 2014, the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge literally swept the nation. I mean, it blew all, it broke all the records. It changed everything, and everyone's been trying to recreate it since then, including the example that Chris just gave. But it did all the things. They raised $115 million in a 6-week period. They raised $220 million over the course of a year. And on top of it, they leveraged an additional $440 million in National Institutes of Health funding to address ALS research and treatment methods. So like that's a boat ton of money.
And they did it by asking people to dump a bucket of ice water over their heads.
Right. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? Like, if I showed up to you and said, hey, I'm going to generate $660 million over the course of a short period of time, 2-year period of time, by asking everyone across the world to video themselves dumping cold water on themselves and then writing us a check, trust me, it'll work.
Do you remember the first person to do it?
I do. Funny enough, it was Greg Norman, the very well-known
Aussie
professional golfer. I saw him play in the Phoenix Open when I was a young child. He challenged Matt Lauer to the Ice Bucket Challenge. And then it kind of grew out of that. So granted, they were on national TV, so they already had a viral. But I think what was interesting is that then they challenged 3 people, and then they challenged 3 people, and it's still like if you're looking to feel like the world is an okay place, Google Ice Bucket Challenge and watch some videos, because it's amazing how many people. Wikipedia lists 113 videos just on this page alone.
And it's the gold standard. Everyone was doing it. Take a listen.
Okay. Hey, I'm Taylor. I'm Jamie. And I want to thank Lily Aldridge and Ingrid Michaelson for this challenge.
And Kyle Newman.
I want to nominate Selena Gomez, Emma Stone, and Ed Sheeran.
I want to nominate Lena Dunham, Topher Grace, and the cast of Heart of Dixie.
We're not just casually holding all these $100 bills. We're actually going to put our money where our mouths are, and every single person you see here, we're going to donate on their behalf $100 each to the cause. Oh, dear God, we're going to do this. Three, two, one.
I know no one can see this, but that water didn't seem very icy. It seemed room temperature to me.
Well,
no one can see it, but I'm just saying, we can see it. All right, all kidding aside.
I was wondering, before you jump on it, I was wondering, hindsight being 2020, why Matt Lauer, but knowing why Matt...
How that resolved.
How that was Greg Norman, like, he was just in that moment, like, really, Matt Lauer needs to be cooled off. Like, cool your jets, friend.
He needed a cold
shower. You needed a cold
yeah.
shower. Let's slow everything down. Let's dump some cold water on you.
Okay. All kidding aside, That is a lot of money. Like you said, gold standard. You just saw or listened to Taylor Swift handing out hundreds for every person that did it. And I think a lot of times too, I think this is important. The public just sees charities as the organization that collects everyone's crumbs. $5 here, $10 there, but they do actually have real money, right?
Absolutely. The sector estimated, $1.05 trillion in the US economy, on an annual basis. As I mentioned before, 5.6% of the GDP.
The Rock's calves, if you will.
Right. And when you think about where that comes from, right? So 75% of these general contributions come from individuals. The remaining 25% grants, foundations, businesses, but the bulk come from regular people giving of their own generosity. And I think that's part of what was interesting about the Ice Bucket Challenge is it caught people at a certain moment of time. I actually knew one of the reasons why I did it was I knew someone with ALS, and I was like, yes, I will do this, and I will write a check. A, to be part of something larger than myself, and B, to support research on this disease that I was watching impact someone directly. And I think there's a factor in all of this when people are thinking about charity, whether it's giving or working within it, is that's how people connect. It's personal, and they feel like they can be part of something bigger.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two things about this is that it was amazing to me is that when normally when not-for-profits raise that type of money, you have one large gift that makes up a significant portion of that type of total output. And they didn't. This was kind of in a way a grassroots $10, $20, $30, these little checks that all built up to the $115 million in a 6-week period. And that's unheard of when you're trying to raise money. Typically that's a death by 1,000 paper cuts of raising money for not-for-profits, because you usually have that thing behind you of, I've got a $50 million gift and we're just trying to leverage that. And the other thing that you mentioned, Eric, is how they were able to leverage the money that raised in that period of time to raise additional funds outside of just those individual giving. And I can't remember did you say there was like $440 million of additional funds raised by leveraging that first 6-week period of time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So they leveraged additional dollars, but not only that, they took the number of scientists in the ALS network from 71 to 471. So just explosively expanding the number of people working on making progress on this really hideous disease. And I think that's one of the challenges is in the for-profit sector, the dollars are the benchmark, whereas in the charitable sector, results are the commodity. Results are the bottom line.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's what I think a lot of people, when they donate, it makes them feel good. It's something that they're passionate about, like, oh yeah, sure, $20, I can help out. But I mean, I think I've wondered at times, like, what does this actually do? So 7 years later, I mean, you touched on it, but what are the results of this?
Yeah, and some of the results are an increased network of not only scientists working on this, but also an increased network of providers with, further developments. Now, with a disease like this that is, pervasive and very, very complicated, right? This is not. There's no flip of a switch. Oh, that's it. We won.
Right.
Right. But at the same time, without this level of exponential progress and growth, it may never have happened. And I think that's the other thing that's interesting about this is this was specific to a disease, right? This wasn't come help the world.
This wasn't the Red Cross.
It wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't let's end poverty. Right.
Yeah.
Which is a great mission, but it also is challenging to address. Whereas dump a bucket on your head, write a $25 check and help help address a disease.
Actually, on that note, is it easier for a nonprofit that has a much more surgical cause to get results because they don't have as many hands in the ice bucket, if you will?
I would say yes, absolutely. I wouldn't ever characterize generating revenue for a nonprofit as easy, but does having a clear message with measurable outcomes improve your likelihood of raising money? Yes, absolutely. The other cool thing about this event, and this is why this event has so many people have tried to replicate it, is these are all unrestricted dollars.
Yeah.
These are all dollars that were given to ALS to make progress, do your mission, make progress. And that's where the greatest impact can happen, because they can surgically, as an organization, target those dollars. They can say, ooh, this scientist is really making good progress. Let's further expand their grant. Ooh, this university is educating more people in this particular field that will impact ALS research into the future. We can do that. They weren't hamstrung by, well, we only want you to do this year during this time frame, wearing a blue dress. There weren't those levels of restrictions.
Yeah, and I'm really intrigued. And the 7 years seems like a really long time, but as you said, for an ALS, as a complicated disease as this is, you can't flip a switch. So I'm intrigued 15 years from now, 20 years from now, when we really start seeing a significant progress on this, how they can equate the dollars raised during 2014 to the length of time in which they feel like they've shortened the time span of their research. Because it won't happen in 7, it may not happen in 10, but it's going to shorten it. And to raise that type of money, it's going to have a serious impact on the end result, the outcome of fighting the ALS disease.
Absolutely. Well, and let's talk about, this was sort of a lightning in a bottle moment, but can we just kind of talk about it and break it down, why we think this fundraising event or movement worked?
Well, I think you're right. It's a moment. And I think it's tied to what was being utilized in the world. 2014 was a season where, the grownups were starting to get on board with some of the viral tools. People with money
they're emailing me.
there was the evolution of viral videos really hit an age group that would respond. And the fact that it started on a morning show, right? Let's just acknowledge the subset of the population that watches shows in the morning,
right?
That was watching Matt Lauer and Greg Norman, right?
The same type of people that were getting the early bird special for dinner.
Right. And so I think part of it is that. I think part of it was, I think you can look at any, the ebbs and flows and the chronology. In the United States, we hadn't had an economic crisis since 2008. Things were starting to look up. And so people were looking for something, to be a part of. And I would say that on a regular basis, people are always looking for things to be a part of. You don't have to spend very much time paying attention to the world to see all the bandwagons that folks want to jump on. This one got big because it was easy to do, right? Like all you needed was a bucket and some ice and a phone.
Yeah, they didn't have to go anywhere. They didn't have to go to a gala like every movie in Mission Impossible, or Iron Man went to galas. They didn't have to do that. They just had to get a bucket and go in their backyard.
Right, and have someone film them and
right.
then go, ah!
And it was a community because, they were challenging their friends, and it became kind of an ongoing thing. And it was everyone kind of, the world was kind of tied together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's some really interesting phenomenon when you think about what the role that the charitable sector plays in building community in very intangible ways. And this is a perfect example, but it also happens at local communities when you have a United Way coordinating a day of caring, when you have an organization pulling people together to do good things. And, part of me speculates that that's why it's not in the movies, because it's just not, it's human beings connecting in a meaningful way. That really doesn't make for good movie watching.
Yeah, it's not sexy, if you will.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and that's okay. Like, but it's also it is one of those things that it's like, oh, this is really important.
Right, and I think the point that you made of bringing communities together, I think the economic impact that these not-for-profits have and attracting other businesses too, having that community togetherness, having arts, having social service, that is important to businesses as they try to decide where their headquarters are going to be. And that may not be a number that you slap on a piece of paper and say, here's what that looks like. But it is absolutely seems that's considered by all businesses as they move to local areas.
And I think even more so, we're seeing some really interesting trending with the generational shift that's going on. And I think the as my teenagers refer to themselves as Zoomers,
God. I can't decide if that's great or terrible or both.
As the Zoomers are kind of moving into the professional world, they're like, yeah, I wanna do good, and that has a very that's good news for the charitable sector. Hopefully, they've got really smart people coming in.
I was really anticipating grammars. Because isn't that the Instagram is the hot thing? Because Facebook's kind of out, right?
Or the
Twitter's kind of on the
The talkers.
What would be the talkers from?
The TikTokers.
Yes, thank you.
Oh,
yeah.
Not talkers.
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 Talk to you.
Talkers. Okay, so to kind of recap, lightning in the bottle of the moment, raising visibility for ALS. It had an impact on the growth of research, role in other sectors like education and healthcare. Had a huge impact on jobs. I mean, do we have any sort of statistics just about what a fundraising campaign like this can do for the economy and like the charitable statistics in general?
It's a huge ebb and flow, right? And there's a lot of Giving USA and others, as Chris already quoted the national charitable sector, information. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of dollars involved. More recent, statistically, I thought this was interesting. Charities got about 7% of the PPP loans, the payroll protection program. Thank you. I knew there was a third P there. But interestingly enough, but only 5.6% of the GDP. Why higher? Well, they were actually keeping people employed because they still needed to, do things like education and social services and all those pieces. So, I thought that was an interesting indicator of the role that the organizations are playing. I would also say that I think there's always an ongoing opportunity to for organizations that fall into that charitable sector. Repeatedly we always tell people it's a tax status. It's really not a business model. You still need to generate money. You still need to deliver results. It's just not the only metric by which you are evaluated. So that's kind of one of our standard pieces of nuggets of information that we want folks to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think United Way and the Red Cross are very popular or well-known not-for-profits, but everybody knows the NRA because of how out there they are in every election, and they're going through a bankruptcy, or have been for a while.
As are the Boy Scouts.
Right, because they, just like a for-profit, if they're not generating the revenue to cover their expenses and their liabilities, they got to do the same stuff. And that's a huge, huge bankruptcy that may be going through. I thought, an interesting stat that we found to that PPP is that PPP dollars saved approximately 51.1 million jobs that those not-for-profits received. That's a ton of jobs.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. And so you're kind of just, the point here is that even though they have different benchmarks than a traditional business, you still have to treat it kind of like a business.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. They're different indicators. They're different metrics. But the bottom line is you can't lose money every year and expect this, whatever organization it is, you can't expect them to maintain that organization to be open. Doesn't matter.
Don't ever expect there to be an ice bucket challenge.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. ALS didn't expect $115 million in a 6-week period.
Right. But they were poised to accept it, and then they were able to deliver on how to do that. Now, part of that is they're grant makers, right? So they were able to grant out a lot of those dollars. And you can spend a lot of money fairly efficiently. They also didn't spend it all in that same year because they weren't restricted dollars. They spent it over time to address a long-term problem. And those are, but I would say that the application is that the keys to success on this kind of thing is there's an opportunity for engagement. People can do it very easily. Those are the things that make those kinds of fundraisers successful. I would also say that there's in the Cuba Gooding Jr. Vein of things, there is never going to be anything that covers worldwide. That was actually the geographic breadth of that one makes it. Most charities function locally, and that's an okay thing. But it just means that we should be actually citing community theater actors. And I don't have any references to those.
I do. Well, I think also maybe a takeaway would be to think outside of the box, right? Of ways to raise money.
Or the bucket.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah. But I mean, there's 9 different ways to skin a cat, 1 million different ways to skin a cat. But yeah, think about doing something different that might get people's attention.
Yeah, and I would step away from the not-for-profit and say to everybody that's not a not-for-profit, all those individuals, don't overlook the economic impact and how they make your local community, your regional community, and your larger community valuable and important and drive us forward as a city, state, region. Those organizations can help drive that economic impact. So invest in those organizations. Make sure that those organizations are sustaining themselves as well.
It's a huge part of the economy, and we have to support it because most of them at least are doing very good things.
Right. There's not, just because it's not George Clooney and Reese Witherspoon doesn't mean they're not great actors. So, and they're great as part of they add to the overall enjoyment of that movie.
Last question. If the NRA was a supporting character, supporting actor, who would they be?
Let's go with John Lithgow.
In Dexter.
Ah, I like it. Good stuff, everyone. Thank you very much. That's it for today's episode of the Trust Us, We're Professionals podcast, brought to you by all of us at SSC CPAs and Advisors. If you ever have any financial questions, you can always reach out to our website, www.ssccpas.com, or email us, please do, at podcast@ssccpas.com. Erica, Chris, thank you very much.
It was a blast.
Thanks.
Until next time. This podcast was recorded and is being made available by SSC Solutions, Inc., together with its affiliates and its employees, SSC, solely for informational purposes. SSC is not providing or undertaking to provide any financial, economic, legal, accounting, tax, or any other advice in or by virtue of this podcast. The information, statements, comments, views, and opinions provided in this podcast are general in nature, and such information, statements, comments, views, and opinions in the receipt of this podcast by any listener are not intended to be and should not be construed as the provision of investment advice by SSC, that listener or generally, and do not result in any listener being considered a client or customer of SSC. The information, statements, comments, views, and opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make any investment course of action. The information, statements, comments, views, and opinions expressed or provided in this podcast, including by speakers who are not officers, employees, or agents of SSC, are not necessarily those of SSC and may not be current. SSC does not make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of any of the information, statements, comments, views, or opinions contained in this podcast, and any liability thereof, including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage of any kind whatsoever, is expressly disclaimed. SSC does not undertake any obligation whatsoever to provide any form of update, amendment, change, or correction to any of this information, statements, comments, views, or opinions set forth in this podcast. No part of this podcast may, without SSC Solutions Inc.'s prior written consent, be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in any form by any means.